Is Dr. Mary Papazian, who is a two-time college president and also senior advisor to AGB, and she's a GlobalMindED board member and just phenomenal human and leader overall. So we're going to kick it off to Mary and her tremendous panel to launch the day. Mary.
Thank you, Carol, and thank you, Jen, for the gracious hospitality today. As you heard, I'm Mary Papazian, and I'm a senior fellow right now with the Association of Governing Boards. I thought I had seen everything when I led a university through COVID. We thought that was one of the worst and most difficult and challenging environments we'd find ourselves in. But I was wrong. Let me just say it right out in front. Working with boards today, I can tell you that the environment has never been more complex. All of you know it. You're experiencing it every day. And I hear board members ask, are we still relevant? Are we still able to fulfill the mission that we're here for? They're less worried now about can they do it with excellence. They're more worried about whether they can survive. And that's really an unfortunate place for all of us to be. So here we are. We're facing an enrollment cliff. We're facing demands for accountability that are unprecedented, where people want to see, rightfully, that there is a return on investment to the work that we're doing. And we're facing new challenges from the political environment that is putting pressure on all of our institutions. We are fortunate to be joined with 4 leaders today who have worked for a long time in this space of equity and accountability, and are leaders who have really been not only leading for the world we had been in, but are really helping us find pathways to address the current issues. So I want to jump right in. We have a tight amount of time. I've given them far more to think about than we have time for. We can give you a half a day, and we have 50 minutes. So I'm going to just jump right in. And actually, Barbara, I'm going to start right with you. Introduce yourself. Actually, Cheryl, let me start with you, since you're right on my left. I'm going to let each of my panelists introduce themselves briefly, and just say one thing about the organization that they represent that they think needs to be a priority in 2025. I've asked them to be very brief, so we'll do just a quick lightning round of introductions and top priority for you. So Cheryl, let's start with you.
Thank you so much, and thank you to the GlobalMindED team. Thank you, Carol, for the invitation to be here. I'm Cheryl Holcomb-McCoy, and I think this is my very first GlobalMindED event, so I'm truly happy to be here. I am currently the CEO and president of the American Association of Colleges for Teacher Education. I started 9 months ago. Sometimes it seems like 9 years ago. Lots has happened in higher education and K-12 over the last 9 months. AACTE has a long legacy. We represent now over 500 colleges and schools of education that sit obviously on higher education campuses, which means that our reach, students who come through AACTE programs and faculty, thousands of students and faculty members, deans are a part of, deans of education are a part of of our organization. I am a career-long educator, and I say that very proudly. I started as a kindergarten teacher, and then became a school counselor because I was, years ago, concerned about the social-emotional side of learning, and did that for many years, and then went on to get my doctorate in counselor education. I started my professorial career here in New York City, actually, in the CUNY system. I don't know if there are any CUNY folks here. Brooklyn College, yes, at Brooklyn College of the CUNY system. I then went on to the University of Maryland, College Park, left there and went to Johns Hopkins University, then went on to American University, and I was a dean of the School of Education there, and now I'm at AACTE. So it has been a full career journey. And that is part of who I am, from a kindergarten teacher to a dean to now leading the charge around public education and teacher education, educator preparation in general. I would say that our challenge at AACTE right now is to protect our profession and to protect public education. It's true that there are areas of public education, which we'll talk about today, around accountability. But we're really being threatened. And my organization, many of our members lost research grants, teacher preparation grants this year. Academic freedom is on the table. What we can teach and not teach is on the table. And so my goal for 2025 has been to preserve the parts of our institution that are so dear to education. And I still am a firm believer that education is foundational to everything else. It is what we build our democracy on. And so I am working hard to preserve education as we know it.
An easy priority.
Is this alive? No? Hello? All right. Hi, I'm Barbara Gellman-Danley, and I'm with the Higher Learning Commission. We are the largest accreditor in the country that overlooks full institutions from what we were used to be regional, what's now an open environment. I've been with the Higher Learning Commission for 11 years, and right now it is very clear to me that our institutions are under a serious amount of stress. I talk to college presidents every day. I have been a university president and college president a couple of times. I've been at the state level a couple of times. It's really great to be here with this small but mighty group of individuals that are running the organization with Cheryl. And it's so nice I could say whatever I want now, because those of you who know accreditation know I'm tied to the federal government, but not part of it. So I have to edit what I say, or at least be very cautious. However, there comes a point where all of us in higher education need to have courage and need to say exactly what we need to say, and need to stand up to the kinds of things we're facing these days. So I would say we do trends every year, Higher Learning Commission trends, and that you can find them on our website in higher education. But I would say the dominant one is the importance of responding to the marketplace for both sustainability and leadership. It is now 200 years ago when higher education started. We say we want to change people's lives. We're a little bit difficult in doing that for ourselves, and it's time.
Does this work? Great. Hi, everyone. I'm Kristen Fox. I'm the CEO of the Business Higher Education Forum. We're a national nonprofit network of college presidents and business leaders. So we work with colleges, community colleges, R1s, the full spectrum across every state, as well as with business leaders who are committed to making sure that we continue to harness, protect, and innovate how higher education as our national ecosystem that we have built at scale as talent and opportunity development for our nation continues to thrive and evolve as we need it to in a really rapidly changing world of work. I joined the organization as CEO just over a year and a half ago. So yes, at a very stable time, not a lot going on, similar to you in your 9-month tenure. I got a little bit on you. But really our focus is on ensuring that we are harnessing the work that's happening in positive and productive ways at our individual institutions, in our regional ecosystems, to ensure that we are being responsive to the needs of the business community, co-developing pathways that are inclusive and agile and that are preparing learners for the future of work. And it's really powerful and important too, and a role that I take very seriously, is the power of having the business community's voice alongside the voice of the higher education sector. I'm sure we'll talk about that more in our conversation here today. But in this moment where, yes, higher education is under threat, and we also can do better, I think it's really important for us to be discussing and sharing how we can build those pathways effectively together. So thanks for having us here, and wonderful event, Cheryl, as always.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Gilda Barabino. I have spent the last 36 years in the academy as a faculty member and administrator at Northeastern University, Georgia Tech, and Emory University. I had the pleasure of serving as Dean of Engineering at the City College of New York in the CUNY system. And after that, I am currently serving as a former president of Olin College of Engineering. This year I'm on a sabbatical leave, enjoying it very much. I've served 5 years as president, and I think it's notable that Olin was founded in 1997 to transform engineering education. The innovation at the time was to look at real-world problem solving and integrate that throughout the curriculum. And as you can imagine now, with the shifting landscape and problems becoming more and more complex, what we really need to figure out in terms of problem solving and using engineering to do so is how do we solve for the future and solve for problems that right now we don't even know that the problem exists. And the focus and the priority is to actually use engineering in ways that you're crossing boundaries, crossing sectors. You are going across disciplines. You are integrating humanities and arts and social sciences with science and technology. You are engaging the public. You are understanding the communities and the communities that we're here to serve, and how do we serve society and engage the communities in helping to define those problems and working to solve those problems together. So that's what I think is most important as we think about the future. And it's such a pleasure to be here. And I'm pleased to be a member of the Board of Trustees for GlobalMindED. Thanks.
Thanks, Gilda, and thanks to all of you for those great introductions. I want to jump right in. Our topic, of course, is around equity, outcomes, and the future of accountability. So I want to jump right into the question of accountability. And Barbara, you're in accreditation. That's what you deal with every day. So I want to start with you. This is really a kind of three-part question, but give me one integrated response. As we all know, there's an unprecedented demand for accountability. Pending legislation requiring ROI data, public skepticism, the data doesn't look great from the news this week about the value of a degree and of higher education, and the proliferation of alternative credentials. So first, what does meaningful accountability look like when outcomes differ dramatically across student populations? And you serve as well at HLC as chair of the credential engine. So how do we ensure that accountability measures don't inadvertently punish institutions serving the most vulnerable students? And finally, how do short-term credentials fit into a coherent accountability framework?
Okay, we have 3 minutes to answer that.
Yes,
so
and she can do it.
I'm going to
if
speak
anybody
very
can.
quickly. I'm in New York, so I could go back
Yep.
to speaking quickly. I'm out of Chicago now. We're an agile organization. That is something that's kind of an oxymoron. You wouldn't normally hear that aligned with an accreditor. So we're all about end users, and the project management is like very important to us. When we are asked to do what we call in higher education bright lines, we just cringe because every institution is different. I've served at community colleges. I've served at private universities. I remember a panel when the Northwestern president said, we have about a 95% opportunity as far as completion, but by the way, it's very hard to get into Northwestern. And then you have open access community colleges. You have to think of the context. That's what is vitally, vitally important. And when I have the pleasure of being in DC and talking to legislators, I try to explain that every institution is different. We have tribal colleges. One time I was in a meeting, I said, well, how would what you're saying affect tribal colleges? And sadly, the person said, oh, I have a meeting I have to get to. And I said, well, that was subtle. So the idea is you can't do it across the board. In higher education and accreditation in particularly, we do want to know what completion rates are. We do want to know where students go. We want consistent data. We've been pushing the federal government for consistent data. Recently, the president and through the Department of Ed sent out a very strict, here's all the data that we want from you from each institution, and they would all either not have it or have to hire people to do it. Gets right down to where do the parents go to college, and what are all the students graduating, and what are they doing now, and they have to, there's a new thing, I won't get into it, but you have to earn more than you paid for college. Well, what if you're in teacher education, which is a very important field? At the Higher Learning Commission, we've moved into the short-term credential space. There are a lot of providers outside of higher ed who are not necessarily the best partners and some who are fabulous. So we have developed an entire program that will be launched at the end of this month on our website about reviewing these external providers. And I think we will learn a lot from them, because I'd like to kind of push that over to the accreditation side as to what we could be looking at. But this is an endorsement, it's not accreditation. We have to realize that for accountability, that we have to be accountable to our students. The Higher Learning Commission changed our mission statement to put the word students first as far as what we want to do. And I've said my whole career, is it in the best interest of the students? As a result, we developed a student guide a few years ago. We're updating it now. Questions students should ask when they go to college. And I was in an Uber one time, and someone was saying, I don't know what to do. I want to go back to college. I don't know what questions to ask. And I said, you're in luck. I got something in my briefcase there. And the questions that I say at the beginning really do tie to accountability, which is, let's start with student intent. I always say to parents, because those of us in higher ed were always asked to, to advise friends about their kids and where they're going to go to college, et cetera. We work with K through 12. We work with not just AP students, but those that would not have had an opportunity. And we pose questions as to what you should be asking when you go to college. Everything from mental health to the kinds of services available, to actually go sit somewhere by yourself where no one's influencing you and say, what do I want to do in college? So that's where accountability is critically important, where it comes back to the student and what they want to do. And that's where this whole short-term credential world is coming from, because the supposition that you want to, that we want to push students who are underserved, et cetera, this is a great equity opportunity in the short-term credentials. Get them into the process. Nothing is more successful than finding you can complete something and then moving on. So I think I have to give 10 seconds to the last question, Mary. And basically, you said ROI, how would you look at ROI? I would look at ROI from the minute that a student started to think about college, to what they wanted, to what happens throughout their career. And my definition of ROI for Barbara is different than yours. And therefore, the data and the way we look at this has to be set in context and the mission of each institution.
And I love the fact that you're thinking through the intersection between four-year degrees, for example, and short-term credentials, that it's really not an either or, it's a both and, if done right. So thank you for that. Kristen, I want to turn to you next. Your members, your CEO members, want accountability for outcomes. Employers often are telling us that graduates simply can't perform on day one, that there's this huge gap between how we in higher ed are preparing students and what employers need. So we know that workforce often tracks most favorably for already privileged students. I'd like you to just pick one high demand field, AI, healthcare, clean energy. Choose the one you think that makes the most sense. How do we measure educational value in ways that account for both employer needs and equity? And what is one accountability metric that would best drive better and more equitable outcomes?
Well, thank you. And I think it's hard to pick just one measure.
You should say
so
that,
I'm trying to stay true to the question, but because to exactly your point, right? There's nuance and context, and that doesn't mean there shouldn't be accountability. But what does it mean? What should that ROI look like? And ROI is an equation which is investment and return. There's an immediate term, right? Short-term dollar impact, but we also need to be thinking longer term, right? And that's another place that we work a lot with our employer and higher ed community around. How do we think about both in the form of short-term credentials? That's stackability, right? That's optionality, right? As you go throughout your career. So some of the things that I think are really important, and then I'll give you an example of some of this in action in the clean energy context. But if we think about value added relative to the cost of a degree, and I think that's or a credential, that's a great example too of teacher education. How do we then think about collectively that is such an important field? We could talk about how much should teachers be paid. I have 3 children; they should be paid a lot, right? But at the same time, how do we also make sure that the investment in an educational pathway to become a teacher, right, is affordable, accessible, et cetera. There's also, I think we need to think about disaggregated outcomes. That's a really important piece of this, and looking at how we're seeing performance differ across different learner populations, et cetera, becomes really important beneath any one metric. I want to share an example of, in clean energy, something happening in Massachusetts, which I think is a good example of how to think about how some of the metrics and accountability come together for employers, learners, and institutions. So in Massachusetts, the state has put some investment from the state government into a revolving pool of funds that then can be accessed by students and institutions who are engaging in and offering industry-aligned credentials in clean energy. They need to be validated, right, by regional industry. They need to be, right, there needs to be a clear demand signal. Then that money gets paid back when those students get jobs. It's designed by then working with local communities around outreach and access and tapping into those relationships that already exist, right, locally throughout the state, right, rural and urban areas, et cetera. That's a good model, right, that's looking at the demand signal as a measure of accountability. It's creating an accessible, revolvable pool of dollars that makes it so that more people can access that otherwise wouldn't be able to. It's a shared de-risking, and it's not just one employer that's making a hiring commitment. We know, right, because I think that's another important element in terms of employer accountability. We often see that the business community will say, design this credential for us, and then, you know, is not able to make hiring commitments, or business cycles change, right? Which is normal, and businesses need to make those decisions. But by then having a pool of dollars, a pool of collective employers, all working together, you de-risk in the system and create more opportunities for students, more opportunities for institutions to learn and collaborate together, and more opportunities then for employers to participate in ways that doesn't mean that just I, as one business, am working, right, individually to create those credentials, but we're working collaboratively and taking that collective load off. So I think there, right, disaggregated outcomes, really tracking the cost of and the affordability, right, of the credential, and then looking at, you know, what does that actually get you in the labor market is really important.
Yeah, that's a great example. And really thinking through from the business perspective, when they demand accountability, ensuring that those demands for accountability aren't actually creating hiring practices that undervalue diverse talent, which can be potentially an outcome. Cheryl, we've talked about teacher preparation. Both of our other speakers have, so let me turn right to you. There's always been accountability in teacher preparation. Do you think that the current accountability measures in teacher ed are advancing equity or undermining it? And what is a structural change that AACTE is pushing that would create an accountability system that rewards programs for both excellence and equity? Can the two go together in the current system? What needs to change?
Wow, 3 minutes, 2 minutes? 3 minutes. Okay, it's a lot there. So first, accountability in teacher education, I think we could argue that we've been missing the mark. We have metrics of teacher accountability, educator accountability, often without including what students see as being important. So I'm glad we have students here, because I think as we move forward, I think one of the challenges for us in teacher education is a rebranding problem. One in which we are talking about education in a way that we are accountable to the students we're teaching in the communities that they are a part of. And so there is this space around co-creation of teacher accountability measures, in which we are, I believe, should focus on relationship building, the human-centeredness of education, as well as the content. Content is always important, but research tells us that students learn from teachers, excellent educators, who appreciate them, see them, value them, hear them, and understand them. We also have research coming out of Johns Hopkins and other institutions that say that students who see teachers and educators that look like them, understand them, speak the same language as them, are able to learn better. So if that's true, this is why I say we need rebranding. Because I just left California a couple of days ago and did a keynote. And in my keynote, I did some research, and I found out that California, one of the largest states, has 60% of its students identify as students of color in that entire state. 1 of every 8 students in the United States are in California. So they're educating a large block of students, and they are diverse students. But guess what? The teachers that are teaching them in California, only 35% of them identify as teachers of color. So we have an issue here. And that issue around the diversification of the workforce is one that AACTE takes very seriously. Now, what that means, if we peel back the onion, I could talk about this for an entire day, but if we peel back the onion, in DC, where I was a dean of the School of Education at American University, we started a teacher pipeline project in which we wanted students, it's a grow your own program, we wanted students from DC to be teachers in the neighborhoods in which they grew up in, because of this research that Johns Hopkins has told us is important. But when I went over to that high school to talk to 11th graders about coming to a dual enrollment program in which they would get credit early in 12th grade for our education program, they said, well, why would I become a teacher? That's the hardest job. My mom told me not to be a teacher. My teacher told me not to be a teacher. Can you believe that? If you're good in math, one guy told me, he wasn't little, actually he was a pretty big guy, smart as a whip, brilliant, and really, really brilliant in math. I said, you would be a wonderful math teacher. He said, but my math teacher told me I shouldn't be a math teacher. I should go into engineering. No offense, engineering. And he would be a wonderful engineer. But he came to us for the dual enrollment program to get these credits. And he was a part of our community. He decided to become a teacher, you all. It was wonderful. Clap on that one, yeah. So we have work to do around diversifying the teacher workforce and ensuring that people hear how powerful education and teaching is. And that takes courage right now. We talked about courage, to stand up and say, education matters. That's what we've been trying to do at AACTE. That is sort of the rebranding. I call it reclaiming the narrative around teaching and how important it is. That then will lead to accountability systems that matter and that work. I do think that we have this opportunity, maybe this is the silver lining in this period. There's been such dismantling of education at the federal level and at the state and local levels to some degree. This is an opportunity for possibility for us to rethink accountability systems and to get it right, to recreate accountability systems in which we're asking community members, students who are in classrooms, aspiring educators, experts in the field, what really matters in the classroom. So if students are already on AI and they're using it, then we need to have accountability systems that understand how teachers should be using AI ethically and responsibly in classrooms. And so this is an opportunity I see for us to rethink or just think about the possibilities of new accountability systems.
We're sharing the mic. No, thank you. And what is true at the K through 12 level is also true at the higher ed level. And so, Gilda, I want to turn to you. You've spent many years championing equity in engineering with measurable results. Certainly, many of those accountability measures tend to look better for more privileged students than they do for students who are underrepresented. So how do you think about those accountability measures, and what do you think we should be using instead of maybe the traditional ones of graduation rates and earnings and persistence that actually can address some of the equitable issues and equitable success that we all really need to see?
I love this opportunity to talk about what we should be looking at, especially following the speakers, this idea of rethinking and reframing and renaming. But I have to give you a little story as an aside. I wanted to be an elementary school teacher, and everyone told me not to. And I tried to live my dream of being an elementary school teacher by always volunteering at my kids' class. At some point, my son said, "You're not the teacher, you need to stay home." But I do think that we need to think about accountability measures. And sometimes it's not so much that the current measures are bad, they're misused and they're misinterpreted. And the one that I would point out in particular is graduation rates and time to completion. Part of the issue is the data is never contextualized. We just have this number, and to your point about it may look good for a privileged group and not look so good for an unprivileged group, it's because we don't provide the context. We don't look at the factors that impact someone's ability to move forward and progress. We look at the individuals as opposed to looking at the systems, and then we blame the individual. So if I was going to measure something and hold some folks accountable, I'd hold the system accountable. I would grade the system and have a scorecard on the institutions. What kinds of programs do you have in place to reduce opportunity gaps? And how well have you done with that? What have you done to make sure, as an institution or organization, that the students progress? So that's one thing that I was thinking of. But I also think of, and thinking about like the whole idea of like co-creation and what do we do together? What if we throw all this stuff out and come up with new metrics and involve students in designing? What would be that metric that you would think helps shows success? What would we look at factors and looking at outcomes? Who got out? What did they do afterwards? What did they do to impact their communities? And what if we had maybe a new system, like it's a combined set of metrics? And what if we looked at a combination of factors and used that as a score? But I do think somehow focusing on the systems and holding systems accountable as opposed to always looking at the individual and not providing the proper context for what people have. Because if we could do a better job looking at advantages versus disadvantages in the overall arena, I think we could come up with more fair and just ways of holding people accountable and measuring that accountability.
Yeah, the move from sort of the individual to systems thinking is, I think, a really important one, even though the challenges in systems impacts individuals. So to all the students in the room, be thinking about what you think would be an effective measure. What would you like to be held to account for? And this agreement, I think, across the board here, that higher ed isn't adverse to accountability. It's just a question of whether that accountability is helping us move forward in the ways that are truly inclusive, and that's been very much at issue. Gilda, just a really quick follow-up, if I may. Thinking about the engineering side, and you've done a lot of work, as I said, with the national academies on anti-racism and advancing anti-racism in STEM. Do you think institutions can achieve equitable outcomes without explicit equity programs, given the current political environment that we're living through?
Yeah, I think whether or not we name something explicitly, it's what you do, it's what values you hold, and if they're actually done, like hold ourselves accountable to actually doing them. So if you think about it, some of the activities and efforts that evolved around trying to reach marginalized communities, those who have been left out, we were doing that to make a difference because these groups weren't being served properly. But what we found was that whatever you do to help the marginalized groups helps everyone, absolutely everyone. So it is, in many ways, as simple as do what you're doing for everyone. Have your values and what you are trying to achieve, integrate that for everyone. And if we have that kind of framework, I think it makes a real difference. I want to give you a quick example for Olin. When I took over as president in 2000 during COVID, one of the first things I did was lead the institution through a strategic planning process, which I call strategic doing. And one of the first things I said at that time was, what are you doing for everyone? And we created a vision for the strategic plan as simple as engineering for everyone. And I think that is our way forward.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. And I know when I was in the Cal State system as president, we had a Graduation 2025 initiative, and it focused on raising the floor and closing the gaps. And it's a question of you can do both, maybe not as quickly, but you can still achieve it. And so, Cheryl, I want to turn to you on the teacher preparation side on this very question. Can you give us an example where focusing explicitly on equity overall, improved overall outcomes for all students, both underrepresented and for everyone else, as a way for us to think in new ways about addressing this important question?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think if you use an equity lens, and the equity lens for K-12 and higher ed is very similar. Obviously, if we use the equality lens, we're giving everyone the same thing, which there are moments when that's okay. But when we're talking about learning and ensuring that students have what they need to be able to thrive and learn, with the understanding that all students are coming from very different places, then an equity lens is appropriate, right? And there are many school districts, for instance, that have, Oakland comes to mind, Oakland Unified District, California, has really thought deeply about restorative practices, ways in which they are giving teachers the professional development to be able to teach different learners at different places in their development. And it's embedded professional development for teachers. This is an ongoing process of learning how to attend to all of the needs of your students, which is something that at AACTE we're really pushing for ongoing professional development and coaching for teachers once they become new teachers. We know that 5-year period after finishing a program in teacher education is critical, and without professional development, we're going to lose teachers. So we know that that is part of our issue when it comes to teacher shortages. So those districts that have engaged in using equity as the basis for everything they do, giving students opportunities to thrive that they need, and understanding that every student is going to need different types of experiences. Also working with teachers, but this is something that's important that we often don't think of as part of this equity practice, is that we also have to share when we think about issues of power, decision making, sharing that process with parents, caregivers, and communities. We know that schools, if you're talking about institutions, schools do better when they engage with the communities in which they serve. So that means not parent engagement as we think of showing up at back to school night or whatever. This is about shared decision making, engaging parents in the process of learning along with their students. Not only parents, but caregivers and community members trusting in the community, that communities know also what's best for students. That sounds so simple, but often is so difficult to embed that in practice. There are districts that are doing that, which we're trying to uplift. There are also other strategies in which at AACTE, many of our member organizations are looking at different designs of the way in which we staff schools that will lead us to a more equity focus. For instance, matching teachers, having 2 teachers in a classroom, we call strategic staffing. That is also important.
Yeah, a lot of work to do there, for sure. Barbara, I know we're getting close to our time, but I have a couple more quick questions I want to ask. You hold institutions accountable through the HLC and through accreditation. When you evaluate an institution that claims strong outcomes but serves primarily privileged students versus one with lower completion rates serving high-need populations, how do you assess quality and accountability fairly? How do you bring that context into the assessment to ensure that we move from simple metrics that are box checking to some real actionable evaluation?
I'll answer that, and I want to make a few comments as to what I heard. For those of you not in higher education, there was a huge thing that happened this year, which is a new classification of institutions, not by Research One, regional campuses, community college, but it was all based on social and economic mobility. So in assessing an institution, the Carnegie classifications have that opportunity now. And I think that's critically important just to call to everybody's attention. We do not expect institutions to give the same responses to our criteria about teaching and learning, et cetera. And that is why starting this past September, last month, we began a new set of criteria that says mission, 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 and answer each of these according to your mission. So if a research institution wants to talk about how they respond to completion rates and all that, it's very different. Community colleges, I spent a lot of years in community colleges, and that, it keeps going through my mind as everybody's talking. When we got started back in the 60s, there was one institution before that in Illinois, but usually 60s and 70s. For years, we used the expression community as our middle name. And because we didn't have the terms that are out now where it's college and everything because of mission creep or however you want to look at it for bachelor's degrees at community colleges. But I think you really have to look at them very separately. I do want to give an example that I think is important. Because it's competitive now, we have some interesting states that want to move to HLC. And I don't want to name them, so I'll just say like a lot of hurricanes take place in one of them. And I've worked very closely with that state and have a very good relationship with their leadership of all the systems. And we did say to them one time, I did, when they came to our Seeking Accreditation workshop, all right, your leader at the top is saying, get rid of all these words, DEI, et cetera. How are you going to continue to meet that need, i.e. the values of higher education? And to a person, the 70 individuals there representing that state said, we're going to do it. So I do feel that higher education will do well and will survive. I do think, however, that when we are being asked, how do you know students are learning? How do you know this is going on? Quality assurance. Accreditors play an absolutely critical role. And I do think when we talk about all the skill set that we should be looking at, let's not forget the durable skills. As you were talking, I'm certified as a coach in social emotional intelligence. A lot of schools, of course, are getting deeply in that. You've mentioned that. But I think it's important that we don't just say either or on any of these things. And we have faith in the history and the future of higher education.
Thank you, Barbara. And I'm going to let Kristen bring us home with one final question. Just a brief response, Kristen, but it's an important one. What is a specific way that BHEF holds both higher education and business accountable for creating equitable pathways to careers? We talk about it, business talks about it, but it doesn't always show up in the hiring. So just a quick insight from your work on partnerships.
Yeah. We actually hear pretty loudly and clearly from our business partners that they want to reflect the communities that they serve. That's really important. They might talk about it differently if they're a publicly traded or private company, but that's a really important value that's shared by most of our business partners. Risk is one of the things that I find generally, right, it can explain a lot of human behavior or inaction. So what we do is a lot of backwards design, right? From what we need, what will work. We have examples on our website freely available about ways we've done that with organizations like Ernst & Young, right, who only hired bachelor's degree candidates, did not have enough skilled talent that they needed in the Texas region, and so helped them to think about how can you hire more associate's degree grads for certain roles? What does that look like? How do you think about that recruitment process, et cetera, and how do you de-risk that? The other thing that we do, besides that backwards design, is what I would call co-opetition, right? Where how do we cooperate around finding what works? And also a little bit of healthy competition, right? Around who's doing it better, what can we learn from each other, et cetera. So those are two, and happy to share more.
Co-opetition, the new word of the day. Let's give our panelists a round of applause. Thank you.